Good afternoon and good evening, everyone, from wherever you're calling in from today. My name is Nabia Ofosuama. I'm a senior corporate engagement advisor focused on global water security at the Nature Conservancy. And welcome to our session on corporate impact measurement and evaluation for watershed health and resilience. This is a photo of the sunrise over the Anacostia River, which is one of the rivers in the watershed where I'm calling in from today. So as we're waiting for people to connect, please type into the Pathable chat where you're calling in from today. We'd love to see where we have people in for this session. We're thrilled to have you here for this World Water Week session, again, on corporate impact measurement for watershed health and resilience, sponsored by Anheuser-Busch InBev, Limnotech, PepsiCo, the Nature Conservancy, and water.org. And today we'll be talking about new approaches and resources for engaging corporations in measurement and evaluation of impact in watersheds. This is a high-level overview of our agenda for today, which will include a short introductory presentation on the topic, participant interaction through polls and Q&A, and we'll have a panel of experts as well who'll be able to answer your questions as we go along. And this is our distinguished panel of speakers for today. We have Samantha Farbach, Global Director of Water Sustainability Operations at AB InBev, David Grant, Global Water Management Director at PepsiCo, Claire Lyons, Senior Manager and Practice Lead at water.org. So they'll be our three panelists. And Wendy Larson, Associate Vice President at Limnotech, will be moderating the panel and the Q&A. My colleague, Michael Matisich, who's Corporate Strategy Associate for Global Water Security at the Nature Conservancy, will help move us through this session with participant interaction. And if you'd like to learn more about the speakers, please go to the Files section in the event page for more information and their full bios. So I'll begin with a short presentation on the topic, including global water trends and corporate impact measurement. Corporate water stewardship is a concept that has developed over the past number of decades with a range of policy and regulatory drivers, increasing conflicts over water, and increasing physical, regulatory, and reputational risks that have driven a proliferation of water stewardship tools and initiatives and increased expectations of companies through the early 2000s. The UN Global Compact's CEO Water Mandate was launched in 2007, and the first version of the Alliance for Water Stewardship Standard was released in 2014. And there are now hundreds of companies and other organizations who are members of these initiatives. In the last 5 or so years, more companies and sectors have set more and more ambitious water goals. And the ambition of these commitments has elevated to include contextual and science-based targets, net positive water impact, and improving watershed health as goals that companies are trying to achieve. Water stewardship is defined by the Alliance for Water Stewardship as the use of water that is socially and culturally equitable, environmentally sustainable, and economically beneficial, achieved through a stakeholder-inclusive process that involves site and catchment-based actions. Water stewardship aims to achieve these ideal outcomes, which include good water governance, sustainable water balance, good water quality status, important water-related areas, and safe water, sanitation, hygiene, or WASH for all. In addition to trying to achieve those outcomes, companies have also more recently begun to set goals around watershed health, which is a new direction for companies. You can see the goals that 6 companies have set for 2025 or 2030 that include a focus on measurably improving water availability, quality, and watershed health, as you can see in the goals from AB InBev, Coca-Cola, and PepsiCo, promoting sustainable water usage, as you can see in the goal from Mars, and then protecting water for people and nature, as you can see in the goal from P&G. We define watershed health as water quantity, water quality, and ecosystem conditions within a watershed. A healthy watershed has balanced water quantity, good water quality, and healthy ecosystems, and it's also supported by appropriate infrastructure, like strong WASH and good governance. And it is suitable to protect human health and to maintain viable ecological functions and processes. So companies are really trying to focus on how we can ensure our watersheds are healthy, have strong infrastructure, have good governance in the goals that they're setting out for themselves. Another example of a new direction for companies is the CEO Water Mandates Water Resilience Coalition, which was launched in 2020, of which 22 companies are now members, where they have made commitments to achieving net positive water impact related to availability, quality, and accessibility of water, including measurable net positive water impact in water-stressed basins and other commitments that you can see on this slide by 2050. So the push for increased corporate ambition around water, the desire to achieve ideal outcomes, the corresponding public commitments of companies focused on measuring changes in watersheds, there's some work to be done in collaborating with companies and others on how to measure impact in watersheds. And what do we mean by measuring impact? We're referring to the process of establishing site-specific goals, determining objectives that can be measured, and setting up monitoring and evaluation plans in priority sites or intervention areas in support of achieving the company's broader water stewardship goals. This is often an area that's under-resourced in corporate water stewardship, but this trend where we're focusing on more measurable impact may need to change if we're helping companies credibly achieve the goals related to contributing to improved health of watersheds and lasting wash services for all. This is the water stewardship activity pathway that was formalized in 2019, where water stewardship begins with inputs like funds from a company, moves to activities like tree planting or improved wash access that move to a set of outputs, which then lead to outcomes and impacts in the form of social, economic, and environmental benefits. Oftentimes, water stewardship projects currently are communicated in terms of the outputs: the number of taps and toilets installed, the number of trees planted, the estimated volumetric benefits, etc. But the types of goals that companies are now setting move us into the space of outcomes and impacts. A robust measurement and evaluation can help to move us further to the right on this pathway, focusing on including changes in watershed conditions, impacts on people's lives through wash, beyond the outputs of corporate water stewardship efforts, which may be easier to measure, but we may need to continue to move further right. Strong impact measurement can help us to understand the intervention successes and failures, contribute to adaptive management and resilience, credibly demonstrate outcomes to key stakeholders, validate program return on investment, and also inform future investment decisions, and evaluate effectiveness across multiple scales, both project effectiveness, but then also effectiveness of work that's done across an entire basin. This is why we see impact measurement as being really important and something that will be very much of value to companies and other stakeholders moving forward. And finally, how can companies support impact measurement? They can do so in a range of ways, including collaborating around data, so helping to select metrics and key performance indicators, identifying outputs that are linked to those outcomes and impacts, and also sharing company watershed or wash data that they have available to help contribute to project processes. They can provide sufficient resources for measurement. That includes finances dedicated to measurement specifically, beyond finances for project implementation, and also contributing staff capacity or time to support measurement efforts. Companies can also convene stakeholders. They can help to bring in experts to assess shared water challenges and desired conditions, and also collaborate to develop a measurement plan early on in collaboration. That's something that we've learned. It's really important to start thinking about measurement as soon as you think about the initiatives you want to put in place. Providing communications resources. Companies have deep communications expertise that can be brought to bear in terms of reporting outcomes to key stakeholders. And then finally, building capacity. Companies can help support innovation in watershed health and wash, both through supporting startup companies, for example, or using their resources to support organizations on this journey. So thank you very much. I hope that presentation provided you with an overview of the history, the current trends in corporate water stewardship, the new directions that companies are taking, the value of an increasing focus on measurement and the impact of watersheds, and how companies can get involved and support these efforts. If you have any questions on that presentation, please type them into the Pathful chat and I'll do my best to get back to you. We're now moving to our first poll, and I'll hand it over to Michael Matisich.
Great, thank you, Navia. So to find the first poll, please make sure you are on the Pathable event page. And on the right side of the page, you will see a polls tab. So click on that tab, and then you should see the first poll question. Navia, we might have an issue with the first poll. I don't think it loaded. So we might have to revert to the chat if that's the case. But the first question is going to be, in 1 or 2 words, what are the most important aspects of measuring impact? So it looks like, okay, it looks like people are seeing it from their end. So that's great. So please just go ahead and type in 1 or 2 words, and then the results will come through a word cloud. So we should see those in a minute. If you're having trouble accessing the poll, feel free to just type your response into the chat, and we'll capture it that way as well. If any of our panelists can see the results, I don't think Navi and I, for some reason, can see them. So if anyone wants to chime in, if you can see the results. If not, we will send them out hopefully after this session, or we'll capture them in the recording that you'll see afterwards. It looks like I can see 1, so specify impact came through. Maybe wait 30 more seconds and see if anything else comes through.
I think it should. I think I may have figured out an issue with that poll. So if people want to go take a look at that and see if it's coming up. I know some people are responding to the second poll that we have as well, but there should be the in 1 or 2 words, what are the most important aspects of measuring impact poll that's coming up as well.
Oh, yep, I can see that one now. Thank you, Navia. Okay, so we have common metrics, plan ahead, again, specify impact, or specificity, impact. Great, well, feel free to keep responding if you're just getting the chance to do so now. And then we'll take a look at those maybe at the end of the session again. But other than that, let's maybe move on to the panel, Navia, so back to you.
Great, thanks so much, Michael. Thanks everyone for your patience with that. So we're now moving over to our panel, and I'll hand it over to Wendy Larson.
Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It's been a busy week. Really appreciate our resilient group of panelists here, and look forward to our discussions. So I'm going to start. I've got a few questions for each of you, and I'm going to start with Sammy. And Sammy is with AB InBev, and AB InBev has made a commitment that that 100% of its communities in high-stress areas will have measurably improved water availability and quality by 2020. So Sammy, I know I've heard you on some of the other sessions this week, but kind of share why you chose to focus on measurable improvement. But not everyone was probably in those sessions. So if you could share a little bit about why you chose to focus on measurable improvement, and how do you plan to go about measuring your impact?
Yeah, thanks, Wendy, and thanks everyone for the opportunity to be here, to the Nature Conservancy for organizing this great session. So as you said, Wendy, we launched our most recent set of sustainability goals, including the water stewardship commitment that you just mentioned back in 2018. And these goals represented a pretty significant shift for our company in terms of going from looking mostly inward at our operational environmental footprint to looking outward at the impact we felt we could have on the communities and ecosystems across our value chain and that our business really relies on. And on water specifically, we had already invested a lot in understanding the nature of the water risks we were facing as a business. And of course, water is a shared resource. And so the challenges that we're seeing with water around the world represent shared risk between our business and the communities that we're a part of. And we realized that if we really wanted to move the needle on water risk, if we really wanted to contribute to solving these water challenges for the long run, we had to focus on watershed health, as Navia kind of alluded to in her introduction, and to holding ourselves accountable for making tangible, measurable improvements in those watersheds facing water stress. And so this commitment to tangible outcomes and going beyond just looking at our operational water use was really kind of a breakthrough for us as a company. We know that water challenges are hyper-local, and I think probably most of the people joining this session understand that as well. And so our view is that there, was not going to be a one-size-fits-all solution that could be implemented everywhere. So we developed a 7-step watershed management process that we're implementing at each of our sites located in areas facing water stress. And the process isn't rocket science or anything. It starts with stakeholder engagement and outreach, really understanding the problem, identifying what solutions would specifically be well suited to solving those problems, and then beginning implementation, establishing governance and financing mechanisms, and communicating our progress. And the last step is monitoring and measuring impact, which is of course our focus today. And given that the water problems we're trying to solve are unique in each watershed where we're working, the KPIs and the indicators and the measurable impacts we're working towards by 2025 to achieve our overall goal are defined at that watershed level as well. And for water availability problems, for example, KPIs might include groundwater levels or recharge, environmental flows, stream volume, soil infiltration, or more on the wash side, the number of people with improved access to safe water. On the other side, if the issue is more on the water quality side, we may be working towards measuring, pollutant loads or concentration, turbidity, conductivity, suspended solids, etc. And what we know through working with partners like the Nature Conservancy and doing this work for a while is that how you monitor, measure, and evaluate your impact also has to be designed around the project you're actually implementing and what outcomes and impacts you're trying to get to. So this is a key lesson we've learned. And what was interesting to us as we went through this is that there wasn't a lot of guidance out there actually on helping corporate water practitioners like myself or my colleagues who work at the more local level across our business build a robust impact measurement plan for their water projects. And so we began working with the Nature Conservancy through our partnership with them on a measurement and evaluation guide for our colleagues within AB InBev, and realized that actually perhaps some other companies may, benefit from such a guide as well. And so thrilled to say that just earlier today, the guide was published for anyone to check out and use, and you can find it on the event page for the session we're in now, as well as on the AB InBev and TNC website. So just wanted to give a plug to that.
Great. Yeah, I'm looking forward to reading that, Sammy. It struck me when you were sharing that you were talking about the kinds of things that you need to measure, like groundwater levels and pollutant loads in streams, and the scale of what you're doing is quite different than a project scale, looking at not just the impact of that project, but the impact by itself, but how are you changing the stream quality or groundwater levels and the like, which is a bit more challenging, I think.
Definitely. And I think one of the things that we kind of get at in the guide is, it's important to pick the right spatial scale, the right temporal scale. I think we all, including AB InBev, we really like to dream big, but I think it's also important to think through, okay, where can we really have measurable impact and tangible impact? Let's start at that scale. Let's bring other people into the mix. Let's bring other companies. Let's bring other partners in other sectors and begin to expand that scale outward to see, you know, if we can really get to those lasting widespread changes within a watershed. But it is challenging. I think, you know, again, that's why we kind of worked on this guide and what we work with partners like TNC and also WWF on, engaging with our local teams to help them think through, where can we make a difference in a tangible way that really addresses the problems in the watershed at hand.
So what will we find in that guide specifically? What kinds of is it sort of a stepwise?
It is, you know, it's really intended to sort of demystify the process of measuring the impact of or corporate watershed projects and help practitioners, you know, engage their project partners early on. As Nabi again said, it's really important to be thinking about measurement from the beginning. You know, we a big lesson learned also is that companies shouldn't feel like they have to go this alone. Certainly, you know, I'm not a hydrologist. This isn't my area of expertise, but what this guide does is kind of help me think through, what do I need to be thinking about? What are the questions I need to have answers to? And then what are the questions I need to be asking of my implementing partners? It breaks the process down into, you know, 5 steps of defining objectives, developing performance indicators and metrics, planning your data collection, then analyzing and evaluating that data, and then reporting and communicating out to the stakeholders that are, you know, invested in that work. And so I think, you know, trying to simplify along those steps, and again, providing, you know, some real world examples, using that impact activity pathway that Nabia showed, and using key questions to ask yourself to kind of, you know, guide people along on their journey.
Great. So looking forward to seeing that. And again, Sammy, I think you mentioned that the link will be on the Pathable.
Yep, I think it's on the site page for this session, and also you can find it on the AB InBev website as well as the TNC website.
Right.
A few of us posted on LinkedIn as well, so lots of channels for you to check out the guide.
Great, good. Well, congratulations to you and TNC folks that worked with you on that. It's very exciting. All right, I'm going to switch over to Claire Lyons now with water.org. And Claire, I know that water.org works with corporations, and you work with other partners to increase access to financing for safe water and sanitation. So I'm sure you have plenty of financial metrics along those lines, but I'm interested in drawing you out on other impacts of those investments. And do you have a standard set of metrics that you collect? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Love to. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. It's really nice to be here with everybody. And it is awfully difficult year after year, you know, not to be together in Stockholm. We really miss the face-to-face interaction, but I'm glad that we could be here at least through Zoom and Pathable. You know, both when I was in my corporate life formerly and now at work is a not-for-profit. What we measure matters desperately. Every kind of institution that is really working on a purpose framework understands the inherent importance of a good measurement system. And so we have many key performance indicators, but we have a handful that are really, you know, for our global network of offices and teams that stand out. And of course, we are focused on water and sanitation access. We do that by building out and supporting the growth of sustainable marketplaces of finance, right? So we're not going in there building wells or anything like that ourselves, but sure that lending institutions, banks, and other types of networks are prioritizing water and sanitation. So part of what we know is important to measure is the number of loans, right, that the number of institutions, the number of loans that are going out there, the growth and stability of those lending institutions year over year to provide portfolios and
I think we're frozen up a bit, Claire.
Maybe Claire could try turning off her video.
Yeah, Claire, could maybe turn your video off and we'll see if we get a better connection from you. Okay, we'll wait for Claire to come back just a minute. I was just sending her a note to have her turn off.
I think she may have dropped off, so we may want to move to
Okay.
David.
All right, well, we'll come back to Claire as she was having some connectivity issues. David.
Hello.
We'll move on to you. So David, PepsiCo recently made an announcement related to a new commitment to be water positive by 2030. And maybe you could talk, since that was, I think I saw that announcement just a couple of weeks ago, talk a little bit about that and how you anticipate measuring progress and demonstrating PepsiCo's contributions to outcomes at a watershed scale.
Yeah, sure. So as you mentioned, we recently announced our 2030 water positive goals. Essentially they fall under over 4 key buckets. The first one is really pushing our ambition around water use efficiency in our facilities, and really going for best practice there, and not only with our own facilities, but also pushing that into our broader third-party manufacturing network. So whereas our goals now kind of focus on around 100 facilities, that's going to now expand to about 1,000 facilities. So it's a much bigger scope in terms of what we're looking at. We've also made a commitment to be greater than 100% replenishing more than 100% of the water that we use back into local watersheds. And again, that goal also goes on to our third-party manufacturing network as well. So really expanding that focus. Importantly, we're recognizing the impact of water in our agricultural supply chain. So we've got a very specific goal within our regenerative agriculture framework, looking at improving watershed health in the areas that we source from. And then finally, it's around our water access goal, where we've committed to reach 100 million people by 2030. So really ambitious goals. And as you're saying, it really expands the need to monitor and evaluate how we progress against these goals. So I guess just kind of touching on that, we've recently adopted a 4-stage process in terms of how we do monitoring and evaluation of our, and particularly relating to watershed health. And it's not very dissimilar to what's already been discussed already. And just a quick shout out to AB InBev and TNC for releasing that guide. It's fantastic. I think it's probably what's needed right now. Helps go through some of the murkiness of measurement and evaluation. So great work on that front. So in terms of what we do, or what we're planning to do as well, so it's a bit of a combination of work we've done in the past, plus work with Limnotech in terms of helping develop this out, and input from TNC as well. So it's essentially a 4-stage process, as I mentioned. The first one is really assessing where we need to focus, right, which is the basics. So looking at the high-risk watersheds, what are the key risk drivers, and what do we really need to focus on? And I say we, this is not just PepsiCo, this is, as Sammy was mentioning earlier, this is a stakeholder engagement process. It's not just PepsiCo on its own, it's with partners in that local watershed try to understand what the risk drivers are. Yeah, once we understand what those risk drivers are and understand where we want to take that, we developed that impact pathway, which was kind of referenced quite nicely a couple of times already. So looking at what the activity is, what the output is, and what sort of outcome we're looking for. The second phase of this process then goes into what are the potential indicators that we can use to allocate against each one of those things. So from activity level, output, and outcome level, we will be looking at what we want to achieve there, and then seeing what indicators would be relevant against it. So for example, if we're looking at working with farmers at a watershed level, activity level could be nutrient management or reducing water consumption. Going on to the outputs, we'll then be looking at, okay, what does that mean in terms of reducing pollutant load? And the outcome then will be in terms of improving water quality. And then importantly, these KPIs, I mean, they can either respond to a specific scientific objective. So we want to, there could be a requirement to reduce nitrogen in the watershed by 45%, and then we look at what PepsiCo's contribution to that is. Or it could be an improvement from a baseline. So you evaluate it from a baseline situation and then kind of moving it forward. The next element, the third one is the measurement part. That's in terms of what are the actual measurements we need to put against those KPIs. Importantly, and Sammy mentioned this earlier, the spatial side of it in terms of measuring. Then looking at where we measure. So, is it at the farm level? Is it further downstream? And this becomes really important in terms of understanding what our impact is, because some of these partnerships at a local scale make a difference, but when you put it in a broader watershed, you probably won't pick up that difference immediately, just because of the scale. And there's also the time horizons as well, which we need to take into consideration. That also plays an important role in terms of the delay in terms of getting a project to start showing results. Are we expecting this over a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, whatever the case may be? And then the other important one is around the resourcing side. Measurement comes with a lot of resourcing, and I guess taking a step back, this is also important to understand who else is doing what in that watershed, because obviously if you can piggyback on an existing initiative, that's great, instead of having to invest your own resources to do it. And then again, I guess the final one is around evaluating our progress. And there we'll be describing measurable progress against those goals, and whether that's a kind of science-based target where you're looking for percentage reduction, or otherwise against a certain baseline. So I guess that's in a nutshell. It's I say something we are slowly starting to look in terms of how we implement. And I guess an important caveat here as well is, and again, this is something that Sammy referenced earlier, I think it'd be very seldom that PepsiCo in its own right will be implementing this. We work through partners like the Nature Conservancy, WWF, and many others who do this anyway. So it's really to empower our local colleagues on the ground to understand what should be in place. And then if it's not in place, start working with our partners to implement that.
Great. Thank you, David. While you were speaking, there was a question that came in asking about agriculture, if your scope included agricultural supply chain. I think that might have come in while you were speaking, that it goes, and just wanted you to clarify that it goes beyond manufacturing to your agricultural supply chain.
Correct, yes. So we've got a specific watershed health goal within agriculture.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. And you also mentioned, I was thinking, I think you mentioned, like, say you had a 40% reduction target, like in the Mississippi River Basin in the US. and you're linking to science, kind of a science-based target. Can you talk a little bit about the science-based target initiative and how your framework relates to that?
Yeah, the science-based targets for water guidance was released quite not too long ago, and we busy in the process of piloting that in one of our facilities. But I think that this framework fits quite nicely into that. I think what the science-based targets methodology does introduces far more rigor into that system, in terms of understanding what a corporation's or given company's contribution is to a given water stress in a watershed. So rather than going from a baseline improvements to say, well, we'd like to improve water quality by X, you can really go down to a very detailed level, saying what percentage do we need to contribute to that water quality improvement. So I think our framework would fit quite nicely into that, and it talks that through the rigor of the framework. So I think as we go through this piloting process, we will be discovering this. But notwithstanding, there are a significant number of challenges that sit behind monitoring and evaluation, which is, I think, pretty well known in terms of data availability, etc.
Right, great. Thank you, David. Claire, welcome back. I'm gonna jump back to you now.
Right. Apologies all.
Yeah, no worries. This is the world we're in right now. This So let's see. We can pick up where we left off.
I really want to say high-level things about measuring frameworks and shared aligned agreement on what we're measuring is critical to advancing toward our SDGs, right, of making really measurable improvements. And that is this case the same for for-profits and not-for-profits alike. And that's why we seek in so many different ways to work together, because collaborating, I believe, is more easily achieved because we are using frameworks and that are similar, that we understand and can support, and we can message, with more of one larger voice. But it's really, for me, from our perspective, it facilitates greater collaboration, understanding, and that has implications for time, for the urgency, the quickness, the speed with which we can make, have outputs and measurable impacts in our communities. And so water.org cares about watersheds. We're doing finance, globally, but people live in households, in communities, in local watersheds, and some are much more highly stressed than others. And so get to the new metric that has been developed in the last couple of years that I believe is so valuable for us, and we're seeing to corporations as well. And that's the volumetric water benefit accounting process. And fundamentally, it really follows very standard 20 liters per person a day. This is the WHO, the UN, everybody, JMP uses this figure for, a daily amount of access to water. So we're about making sure that people can borrow $200, $400 to build a tap in their home, or put a toilet in. Let's talk about how sanitation at the household and community level is fundamental. It's critical to watershed health. You won't have, healthy, clean watersheds unless you're also simultaneously tackling sanitation, not just at the household level, but really at the community level, right? It's not just all about agriculture. So we need to understand and utilize and piece all of these pieces together into the fabric of watershed health. And back to the volumetric, I think what is one of the benefits of this that is experienced at the institutional level is, let's make it easy for corporate entities that are very intent, very committed to the change that they are, pushing, right? And let's make it easy for them to wrap their arms, wrap their heads, wrap their KPI systems around participating in WASH, right? Yes, it definitely aligns to the ESG agenda and the corporate water stewardship agenda around social benefit or social ROI, but being able to say that we know, because for example in Indonesia, we in less under 12 months we had just over 60,000 loans to households, which represented a total count of beneficiaries or users within those households of these loans for water and sanitation of just over 153,000 people in Indonesia. So what does that mean for volumetric water benefit accounting? So when you do the math, and please feel free to do it, but I can't, clearly I can't even stay on the platform, so I'm not going to take out my my calculator at this point. But what I recall is the gallons per year really in this are about 384 million gallons of water, right? Now, it's not just in the first year you count it. You can a corporation, water.org, can project that this volume of water is going to continue to be available. That number of people are going to continue to have benefit and use of this, and that this water is more than likely connected to communal systems, so it has gone through purification and treatment processes, right? It's not just a backyard well, is what I'm saying. So when we look at the fact that we're able to say, okay, we do this every day, millions of people come online every month or two around the world because they've had access to finance. They've taken a loan, they pay it back over 12 to 18 months. It's one of their top priorities because secondary benefits, let's talk about secondary benefits. There's so many proxies, I won't even go into trying to calculate them for you. We all know when you have access to safely managed water and sanitation, one's health at the household level and the community level are dramatically improved, right? These translate to financial, economic savings and gains within that family, right? Because there's fewer doctor visits and fewer medicines and fewer days out of work because you're generally healthier, right? So, and then there's time savings by not trying to capture or fetch that water, right? Because it's available through a pipe system. You're storing it. That's a whole bit. And I think most importantly, corporations see this too, and it's always been a gender issue of equity. That when we have 24/7, water and sanitation available, people's lives are dramatically improved. And then you multiply that across the community. And one of the ways that makes it comfortable and confident and accessible for corporations to really jump in on the WASH agenda is that they can easily say, okay, my support is going to reach 500,000 people. And over the next 5 years, that means that I can count on X volume of water being accounted for. And that's going to be measured within their whole water stewardship framework. So here's to all those, really talented specialists who've been working on this over the years, and for all of the corporations that embrace it, get behind it, and advance it. It is profoundly important. And so I'm thrilled that we have this.
Great. Claire, that was really, as I was listening to you, I was thinking about that impact pathway that Navia shared, and the volumetric output is it's an output in the middle of that pathway. And you spoke about the importance of quantifying that for companies that are looking for that metric, but also the impacts and outcomes moving further and further to the right, the health of the community, impacts on women, and that kind of thing. So, very interesting. And appreciated. This is a space we've been obviously working in for a long time, and appreciated you sharing those insights. Thank you. So let's see. I think I'm going to, at this point, we just have, Michael, I think we're at the, I saw your warning. We're at the end of our panel discussion. Are we opening it up now for Q&A from, I see one question here, or are we doing a poll before that? What's
Q&A first.
Q&A first. Okay, great. So do you see a question here? And if others, if anyone has questions, please enter them in the chat in the Pathable, in your Pathable link. I know it's a little bit confusing. But one question that came in is, are the impacts being measured unique to each watershed, or is there a standard menu or list that a company could follow? And Sammy, I'm going to start with you on that one. See if you have any response maybe coming out of your guidance that you've released recently.
Yeah, definitely. So I think the answer actually is both. So I think the impacts that are being measured do need to be relevant to the problems you're trying to solve and the projects you're actually implementing at the watershed level. That being said, we know from the evidence base, we know from what all of our companies and organizations like TNC, like LimnoTech, like others have done, that there are certain indicators, and we put them into a menu that makes sense depending on what you're trying to do. So in our guide, I'm sure other people have developed these. I'm sure David and Claire in their work have this set that guide their teams, but we've got a table with potential indicators that you could use based on whether you're trying to address water availability or quantity problems, trying to address water quality problems, trying to address ecosystem or biodiversity or habitat issues, trying to address socioeconomic conditions. And so definitely encourage folks to check out our guide and see, the breakdown, so they can start to kind of paint this picture for themselves based on what they're trying to achieve and their objectives.
Great, thanks, Sammy. Any other panelists have any thoughts on that?
And the other thing I'll probably add is, and I absolutely agree with what Sam's just said, I think what does vary by watershed is the how. So the indicators remain the same, but whether you do it in-stream monitoring, whether you use calculation methodology, so that's always that's a bit that's going to vary. I guess the monitoring element and the evaluation, the KPIs will, as I say, you've probably got a set of KPIs that can be used in between different watersheds, but this is how you measure and evaluate. That's going to vary quite a bit.
Mm-hmm. Great. I see another question that came in. When measuring impact at the watershed level, what is the guidance for attributing impact to the various actors and the actions they are taking? It's a bit a challenge, isn't it? Anyone have any thoughts on that one?
Happy to weigh in again. I mean, I think this is something I think that comes up a lot, particularly when as companies we're trying to engage in collective action. I think, and I think the first thing I'd say is it's an inclination we all have as companies. We want to be able to communicate our exact contribution to things. I do think there's a bit of a watch out in terms of, checking ourselves in terms of trying to have that bias for collective action, because that's how we're going to get to impact at the scale that we need for the water challenges that we have, and not sort of going into maybe smaller scale, less meaningful work just because it's easier to sort of box what our contribution was. I think that there are, depending on the type of project, sort of, relatively simple ways of saying, okay, if these partners put in this pot of money, you can relatively sort of divide up proportionally the impact that you're measuring based on all the methodologies we've discussed by what proportion of the funding or, support did you provide to that thing. And I think that, we all have to get a little bit comfortable with maybe that attribution piece being a little bit squishier, but the impact being really tangible when it all adds up.
Thank you, Sammy. Claire?
Yeah, I would say that we still have a long way to go in our sectors, in our business industries, in moving the mindset and that inspires and rewards institutions for collective action. Even at water.org, we've had years of struggling with, how do we go, for scale. Sammy's point, totally, on point, that it's all about scale. None of us can do this alone. We can't, we shouldn't. So we don't want to get stuck and hold ourselves and our impact back because we're so addicted to attribution. Okay, we got to find ways to build our brand, stronger and better. And I feel that it's, for SDGs and achievement globally, it's got to be increasing around our performance within a collective action model. And we'll need to have more and more shared KPIs. We do, David's point was really spot on. It is really all about the how, isn't it? So if we are loving and proud of, and our companies, our organizations are, really excited about how we are participating together with others, and we are collectively weaving that framework, that fabric that shows together we're making things happen. We have to do much more of that.
Thank you, Claire. I see another question here I'll throw out. I think we still have time. How important is communication in helping to drive change and developing measurement and evaluation? Any thoughts?
Yeah, massively important. And communication in so many different facets as well. So you got communication, for example, within your company to talk to the results that are coming out of these M&E, to get that reinvestment, to make sure you're getting the budget to reinvest into these water partnerships. There's communication with your stakeholders so they understand the progress you're making, how they're benefiting from it. And they kind of feed off each other, because sometimes you rely on local communities to help you with this monitoring and evaluation. And that's where important communication element comes in terms of getting them to understand the purpose and why we're doing it and how it supports them. And then you get their support in terms of monitoring and evaluation. But then also the flip side, making sure you've got that feedback mechanism to demonstrate the progress you make.
Thank you, David. Any other thoughts? And at this point, we could, I see another question. I was going to say, if any of the panelists have any thoughts in response to what they heard from other panelists, please share. I do see another question here. As climate change affects the hydrologic cycle with extremes, floods, droughts, fires, heat waves, etc., how do you incorporate responding to the community needs? And this is really an appropriate question for the theme of this as we wrap up World Water Week and building resilience faster. So anyone want to tackle that in the last few minutes here?
I will very briefly, if I may. Sorry, Sammy. Fundamentally, that's why we're so committed to making sure that access to finance for water and sanitation is ubiquitous, like being able to go to the 7-Eleven and get a drink, right? Or a snack. And so it's all about financing is part of resilience infrastructure. And we know that volatility is going to continue, and the frequency of improvements and repairs, et cetera, changes must be addressed. And we're going to, all of us at different levels are going to have the available money to do that. And it's not necessarily out of pocket for a corporation, as it may not be out of pocket for a family.
Sammy, you were gonna say something?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think that it's a really great question. I think it's gets perhaps a little bit wider than what we're discussing on this panel in terms of companies really thinking through their overall approach and capability set when it comes to water stewardship. I think Pepsi has some amazing goals that they're working towards. We've got ours that I discussed, and I think I think we're driving a lot of our time, human and financial resources towards achieving those goals. But, you know, one thing we've tried to do at AB InBev is also make sure we build the capabilities and resources to have these sort of spot responses to things in other parts of our organization as well. For a while now, particularly in the US, we've been partnering with the American Red Cross to do disaster relief efforts where at some of our facilities, we switch from brewing beer to canning water to provide emergency drinking water, particularly at the moment in the communities where it's needed, leveraging our logistics capabilities. So that's outside my area of expertise. That's our folks in our brewery operations teams and our logistics and fleet operations teams, and then finding, you know, the right types of partners for that type of work, which are often different than the partners we do for nature-based solutions, ecosystem restoration, and that type of work. But I do think it takes time and kind of widening the lens within your company to be able to have, you know, a multi-pronged approach to how you're addressing the both acute and long-term challenges that are associated with water.
Great, thank you, Sammy. Really appreciate all of your responses, all of your thoughtful responses, and your leadership in this area to each of you. I am going to turn this back over to Michael now. I think if we have other questions, we can respond in the chat, but we are close to running out of time. So Michael, I'll turn it back over to you.
Great, thank you, Wendy. So really quick, going back to poll number 1, if you haven't already done so, you can take a look at the results that are now visible in the form of a word cloud. So a few of the highlights include long-term, data, benefits, participatory, common metrics, continuity, realistic, and objectives. So thank you all for your ideas on what you think are the most important aspects of measuring impact. So for number 2, if you just scroll down below poll number 1, you will find the question, which relates to Navia's presentation of various ways companies can contribute to impact measurement. So what do you think is the most important role that companies should play in advancing impact measurement? So options are collaborating around data, providing sufficient resources for measurement, convening stakeholders, providing communications resources, or building capacity. And then if you have a different idea that's not included, go ahead and vote for other, and then you can type your response in the chat. I'll give you guys 30 seconds or so. So far, providing sufficient resources for measurements in the lead with 53% of the vote. Maybe another 10 seconds or so. All right, so we have about 13% for collaborating around data, 56% for providing sufficient resources for measurement, 17% for convening stakeholders, and then 6% for both providing communications resources and building capacity. So great, thank you all for voting. And with that wraps up our session. So thank you for joining us for Corporate Impact Measurement and Evaluation for Watershed Health and Resilience. We hope you found this session interesting, that you learned something that you can take back to your respective organization. And thank you to our panelists and presenter, Sammy, David, Claire, Wendy, and Navia for the great conversation today. I hope you all had an enjoyable World Water Week and that I see you all next year in Stockholm. So until then, take care and have a great weekend.
Thank you all.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.